First, there were 9 amendments. Now there are only 6, and by the end of next week, there may be only 5. Whitney Ray explains.
Medicare recipient Bob Roop doesn't hide his distaste for the new federal health care laws.
The majority of people didn't want it to begin with, and I think the state ought to have the authority to opt out.
Bob wanted to vote in November on an amendment aimed at blocking part of the new regulations in Florida, but the Supreme Court ruled the ballot language drafted by the state legislature was misleading.
Hear ye, hear ye.
Besides health care, the High Court also kept 2 other legislatively backed amendments off the ballot, a tax cut for first-time home buyers and an amendment thwarting proposals to limit lawmakers' power when redrawing political lines.
As you go around the state and you see a district that starts in West Palm Beach and goes over to the Naples area, that just doesn't make any sense.
Former Democratic lawmaker and candidate for chief financial officer Loran Osley says the legislature is out of control.
Time and time again, they put things up, the Supreme Court says no. I think we need to uphold, we've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. Probably need to be looking at that a little bit more closely as legislators are passing bills.
The decision to keep the 3 amendments off the ballot comes days before the printing deadline. But there's one amendment affecting school children that will be on the ballot no matter what's decided. Next Wednesday, a judge will hear the case to kill an amendment loosening class size restrictions, which means it could be ruled misleading, yet stay on the ballot. I'm Whitney Ray for Facing Florida.
Joining me now, elections expert and attorney Ron Meyer, who has filed a lawsuit to take what is now Amendment 8 off the ballot. It's pending before the court. Ron, this is the amendment that changes class size amendment. What is wrong with the intent of what this amendment does?
Well, I think you have to look at what this amendment does first. In 2002, the people of Florida spoke very clearly that they would support financially smaller class sizes, and they passed a citizens initiative which requires the legislature to provide adequate funding so that class sizes will be reduced. And since 2002, they've been stepping forward to the ultimate implementation, which was to occur this year, in 2010, when the class size goals that were spoken to in the Constitution would be implemented. Rather than implementing them, though, this Florida legislature has decided to do it on the cheap again, and instead of implementing the amendment that the people directed, they want to go back to the people, and they're fooling the people. They're trying to fool the people into voting for Amendment 8, which is just a retreat on the funding obligation and a retreat on smaller classes.
Well, now, they would argue that this is a case where class size this current year has to be met at each individual class. They would like to keep it at the school level. They argue that the 19th child shows up, it means a whole nother class.
Well, the legislature's done a good job of obfuscating what this amendment does. What this amendment does is it goes back on the direction of the people. The people were clear. They want to fund education adequately so that in a K-3 classroom, class size will be no more than 18 students. That's the goal. That's a goal, though. The Supreme Court of Florida, in approving the amendment back in 2002, said it's not a hard cap. It's a goal. It's a funding obligation of the state of Florida. If that funding obligation is retreated from, as Amendment 8 would do, then in fact classes are going to grow. Instead of 18 students being the goal, there are now going to be 21 students in K-3. Well, if that's the case, how is that any different when the 22nd student shows up than it is if the 18th or the 19th student shows up? If they want to fix that, if they want flexibility, they could continue to move forward with the Constitution as the people have directed, and they could pass a law that says we're going to have some flexibility. We're going to use common sense.
Well, indeed, as I recall, when the law was written in 2003, they basically made it as draconian as possible because they were hoping to repeal it long before now. But so it seems to me that there is a statutory fix available for the problem that's there right now.
Well, and 2 years ago, the House of Representatives unanimously passed a bill that would have allowed for flexibility, would have put some common sense. There's some play in the joints. The Constitution does not say no classroom will have more than 18 children in K-3. What it says is the state of Florida shall provide adequate resources so that no classroom has to have more than 18. It's not a cap, it's a goal. That's what the Supreme Court of Florida said. And so rather than abiding by the people's will, rather than implementing the goals that the people of Florida have said, They want to confuse the people of Florida with an amendment that doesn't say we're going to cut state funding. It says we're going to talk about averages, we're going to maintain funding, that we're going to do all of these things, but it really just kind of hides the ball as to what the amendment really does.
Now, Rocky Hanna, principal at the Leon High School in Tallahassee, was here right as school was starting, and he was nervous as he could be that he wasn't going to be able to meet class sizes, and he was asking for more flexibility or more money, but he says he's got to have one or the other.
Well, he should have more money because the people have spoken. The people have said, we want to fund smaller classrooms. You don't have to be an educational expert to know that having 18 children in a classroom is going to allow a teacher to do a better job than having 21 or 25 students in a classroom. Smaller classes make sense.
Indeed, I saw a billboard recently from the University of West Florida advertising on Florida State's home turf that says, come to us, we've got smaller classes.
Absolutely. And what do we always hear when we hear about charter schools and voucher schools? It's come to us because we have smaller classes. It's a good thing having smaller classes, and the people know that. Parents know that. Grandparents know that. They want that. And indeed, they thought that they had directed that. How could they be more clear? They amended their Constitution and said, we're going to give you this period of time to implement these smaller classes. And now what we see here is the kind of pressure that Rocky was reacting to being placed on principals and school boards and superintendents.
Now, you're in court next week, and it's too late to actually not have this language on the ballot. So in theory, if you're successful, and I might ask you what your theory is in kicking this amendment off the ballot, what you will argue.
Well, if we're successful, we're asking the court not count any votes that are rendered for Amendment 8 or against Amendment 8. And that's a remedy that the courts have ordered in the past. In other words, it's desirable if you can remove a ballot that's not clear and unambiguous from the electorate so that there's not any confusion and there's not needless attention being paid to it. But it's too late to do that now. And so the next remedy would be you simply don't tally those votes. And so And you also post a notice at the polls telling people that if you vote for Amendment 8, it won't matter whether you're for it or against it because it's not going to be counted. That's the remedy we're asking for.
All right, and your argument is?
The argument is the law says that when you're going to amend the Constitution, the ballot summary and title have to be clear and unambiguous. Those are the words that the court has reiterated over and over and over again, most recently in throwing off the 3 amendments that they've thrown off just recently. And this ballot amendment fails because the summary does not make a mention that the funding of public education by the state, keep in mind this is state funding required in the Constitution, that funding is going to be substantially reduced if Amendment 8 passes. So people need to know that if you vote for Amendment 8, you're voting to cut the amount of money the state sends to public schools.
All right, on that note, I've got to stop you because we are flat out of time. Ron Meyer, thank you so much for being here.
Mike, it's always a pleasure.
All right, everyone else, stay with us. When we come back, we'll talk politics.